Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today I wanted to talk about animal pests in your garden because we talked about insect pests, but we didn't talk about animals. Now, some gardeners make a special effort to attract animals to their plantings. Others work equally hard trying to keep them out. Whether welcomed or repulsed, deer, woodchucks, rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, voles, moles, and other animals can do considerable damage to garden plants, both above the ground and below. Few of the products that claim to repel these animals are actually effective, and then usually only if the animals aren't really that hungry. The most effective controls are fences and traps. Electric fences up to 18 inches high with strands at 4 to 6 intervals can discourage small above ground animals. I don't like electric fencing, but it's an option. Now, deer can jump tall fences, but are held at bay by wide ones. Okay, so if it's tall, they'll go over it. But if it's wide, they have a harder time because deer are better at, they're not great at. So they like to go over a high fence, not a wide one. One excellent design to deter deer is poles set at about a 30 to 45 degree angle and strung with electric wires at 1 foot intervals, with the top wire being about 5 feet off the ground. If it's angled, it makes it more difficult for the deer to jump, right? So an angled fence makes it a little bit more difficult for the deer to get over because now you're making a fence that's wider, and so they have to clear more distance in addition to also having to clear that 5-foot height. That does tend to keep deer out. Now, burrowing animals, well, they're a little different. They can dig basically under your fencing. That's what they do. They're burrowing animals. So to stop them, you might want to dig a 1 foot deep or 2 feet for gophers. Gophers are bad, but about 1 foot deep and about half a foot wide, and then put chicken wire fencing under the ground, right? So you basically extend your fencing a foot or two underground to stop those animals from digging into it, from digging into your garden. That really can work because it basically extends your fencing underground and then you just backfill, right? Then you just backfill and you have underground fence that stops those burrowing animals. But again, you have to go down 2 feet for gophers. It's annoying, but I mean, if you really don't want them in your garden, you do what you have to do, right? And basically, you also need to go up because those burrowing animals, if they can't burrow, they'll just come up and walk over. So you do have to go a couple feet high if that's what you're deterring. So you do have to go like 2 feet down, 2 feet up to stop burrowing animals. Okay. Then you just fill in that trench with soil, and at the top of the fence, leave an additional 2 feet of fencing above the ground, and you're golden. Usually, they will not be able to get under that or over that. Now, of course, there are exceptions. Some burrowing animals also like to climb. So you might have to adjust depending on what critters are trying to get into your garden that year. But you could also leave, if you have a flexible fence like mesh, leave some flapping at the end of your fence post so it kind of blows in the wind. It'll kind of scare off and deter additional animals. And especially climbing animals, they don't like that. They don't like that. So you can try that. You can try traps. I don't like traps either. I don't like electric fencing and I don't like traps. I'm not out to hurt any of the critters. I just don't want them in my garden. So one, we actually do have livestock guardian dogs that double as garden protection dogs. So we do have that going for us as well. And we do small fencing where we really don't want wild animals. Rabbits are probably the easiest to keep out. I know people think rabbits are hard, but they can just be kept out with relatively short fencing, which is 2 foot high fencing. That'll just deter them. They'll go somewhere else to find their snacks. But some animals like deer and like gophers are a lot harder to keep out. So I don't love traps because they can injure or even kill the animals. And after you trap them, what do you do with them? A lot of areas have rules against relocation. So now you've trapped your gopher. What are you going to do with him? Right? So I don't love the idea of trapping. I would rather deter. Okay. So you should, if you are going to trap animals, find out what the rules are in your area. In our area, we're not allowed to relocate. There's good reasons for that, right? In a lot of areas, it's illegal to trap and relocate wildlife. So find out before you start relocating, find out if it's legal in your area, because the fines for that can get kind of hefty. And I would never encourage someone to do something that's going to result in a whole bunch of fines landing on their doorstep. That's not fun for anyone. But deterring wild animals, keeping them out of your garden is not the biggest problem. It's your own animals, okay? So if you have chickens or you have goats, you are going to find they want your garden and they're your own animals. A bunch of the same rules apply. Your best bet is to fence it in, okay, to keep animals out. You can try all the other things. You can try sprinklers. You can try all the other things that people will suggest. Get a sprinkler. It'll scare the animals away. Not if they're your own. If they're your own, they're going to get used to that sprinkler pretty quick, especially if you have ducks. They don't care about water. So you're definitely going to want to use fencing to keep your own animals out of your garden. And again, the type of fencing you use is going to be dictated by what animals you're deterring. So around here, it's rabbits, wild rabbits. Around here, that's almost exclusively what we have is rabbits that are attempting to get into our garden. Luckily, we have the dogs who, they won't hurt a wild rabbit, but they know the difference between a wild rabbit and the rabbits we raise. So they keep the wild rabbits at bay. And we do have deer that really like certain plants that we grow out back. But again, we have the dogs, and they do kind of when they need to. So they will send the deer on their way. They won't hurt the deer. Don't worry about that. Tequila and vodka would never hurt a deer. They would never hurt a bunny. They don't do that. They only hurt something that is actively going after their livestock, but they will repel. Okay, they'll chase the deer and the rabbits out of here. That's why we don't have a ton of wild rabbits in our yard, because they just kind of, they just don't want them in here. So can you use dogs? Sure. Beware that depending on the dog, they might dig your garden up. So my recommendation is fencing. If you are worried about wild animals or even your own animals getting into your garden, I recommend fencing. Customized to what animals you have to repel. For us, it's mainly the chickens and the ducks and the goat. That's our biggest thing, is those three. The horse generally doesn't care about the garden. He would rather munch on the grass and the clover. So we're not particularly worried, at least in that respect, for him. But the goat will eat anything. She's a goat. So we do like to keep the goat out of certain areas, and we use fencing to do that. It really is the most effective. But when you are planning out your garden, do consider the wild animals that are in your area and figure out how best to keep them out. Because there's nothing more heartbreaking than working so hard on your garden, getting halfway through August, and then something comes in and eats all your produce. So when you're in the planning stages of your garden, do think about how you are going to repel those particular pests, what you're going to do to keep them out of your garden, because it sucks when they eat it all. Unless you're planting a garden specifically for them to eat it, which is also valid. That's fair. But you might not be doing that. You might not want to do that. You might be planting the garden for yourself. We plant a plot for our rabbits, but most people don't do that. So I wouldn't recommend getting your animals used to eating your garden, because then your animals think all your gardens are for them. So that's just a few recommendations for how to keep animals out. Fencing is always going to be your best bet. Okay, just fencing that whatever you're trying to deter can't get through. And yeah, if it's burrowing animals like gophers going after your stuff, you're going to have to bury the fencing just so they can't get in. Anyway, that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Relatively short video. I just wanted to mention animal pests before we move on to plant diseases next week. We'll see you then.